Hello, my name is Gene Kelly. I'm president of Executive Protection Products Incorporated. The purpose of this presentation is to make you aware of how your private conversations and communications can be invaded and what you can do to protect yourself. We'll be demonstrating for you many of the actual devices and methods that are used to tap telephones, bug rooms, and invade your privacy. We'll be also telling you how you can protect yourself. First of all, why would people want to eavesdrop on your conversations? They eavesdrop on your conversations because this is one of the best methods of acquiring information that you wouldn't normally share or wouldn't normally be available through many of the databases. We all know information is very valuable. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars annually on telecommunications equipment, computers, etc. If we can all agree now that information is valuable, then we must next determine how long we need to protect that information, how long it's going to be valuable to us. Many things that are valuable, such as bids, contracts, formulas, etc., are only valuable for a limited period of time. Now, we only need to protect it during that period of time. Let me give you an illustration. The atomic bomb, how to make an atomic bomb 40 years ago, was highly classified. It wasn't available. Today, you can go down to a library and you can find out most of the details just by checking out with a library card. The need to protect that information has greatly deteriorated. Okay. Other information, such as protecting of individual privacy, you might want to protect some aspect of that for an entire lifetime. The purpose of this presentation here, though, is going to focus on surreptitious interception of that information and what you can do to protect yourself. Let's talk about telephones and telephone taps. A telephone tap can either be a transmitter that would transmit out the communications to a receiver at another location. It could be a hardwired tap. We could have other types of intercepts along the way. This illustrates here an entire communications link. This would be your home and your home phone, out the demarc point, out to the telephone pole, down to the central office. A central office, it would be either beamed up to a satellite, sent through microwave, landline, to another central office, and then to the other party's telephone of whom you're speaking. Let's talk about how we can have intercepts along the way. Starting here, you could have a transmitter in your phone, okay, and that transmitter would transmit to a receiver that could be parked in a van, could be at another house, location, wherever the listening post is. And every time you pick up the phone, it's powered by the line voltage itself and transmits to the receiver. You could have a tap on the inside of your home wiring. This is often common when it's a spouse tapping the conversations of another spouse. Out here on the demarc point, and we'll talk specifically about the demarc point. It's one of the easiest points at which your telephone wires can be identified, and very easy point for access to place a tap. Out on the telephone line itself, we could place a tap. At the central office, if someone had access to the central office, they could wire so that every time a conversation comes through, it goes out to another location and is recorded, or is recorded at the central office. Satellite and microwave communications, they are not protected. There is no protection on that information. If I had a van and I sat out here in the path of a microwave or satellite with my receiver, I could intercept all of your conversations in the clear. Out on the line between the central office to the central office, it could be tapped. It could be tapped here at the phone at your other party you're speaking to. All the way along the line, the telephone can be tapped. Some of the very clever things you'll run into is here on the line, we can have what's called a slave. Now, this slave would be a device that every time you pick up the phone to make a call, it would activate a recorder at an off-premise location. This is one of the most common devices used in law enforcement, but it could also be used by someone surreptitiously intercepting your calls illegally. Now, does illegal intercepts happen? They happen all the time. One of the problems that the Cincinnati Bell ran into, right now they're being accused by two of their former employees of performing over 1,200 illegal wiretaps in over a short period of a couple of years. 1,200 illegal wiretaps by 2 individuals that worked for the phone company at that time. What types of taps did they do? We'll show you many of the different types themselves, but let me go over this again. The phone is vulnerable. It could have a transmitter inside the phone. It could have a tap on the line inside the house wiring. You could have what's called a hook switch bypass. We'll explain that a little more later. On the phone, you could have a tap here at the DMARC, on the line, a slave, which is like an off-premise extension, at the telephone company, satellite microwave, or on the other end of the conversation. There is no device that's going to tell you whether or not there's a tap on the line between point A and point B. There's no device, let me repeat that because there's a lot of fallacies out there, that there is some magic box that's going to tell you that there's a tap out here at some point. How can that be? If in a microwave or satellite path, there's no physical connection of the receiver to the phone lines. It's simply broadcasting like a radio wave and receiving like a radio. Same as the radio in your car. So if that was the case and there's no physical tap, how could any box, magic box, determine that there was a drain? It couldn't. It's that simple. There is, therefore, no device that will determine from one side of the conversation to another whether or not it's being intercepted. Let's start with the telephone itself and show you a couple of devices that could be within your own home or at the DMARC point be very dangerous to your privacy. Now I'm going to show you a number of the different devices that are really out there. These types of devices may not look like the super James Bondish type taps and transmitters, but they're the real type taps that you're going to run into, especially outside your home or inside your small business. One of the most insidious devices around, it is used all over the world, and it's very inexpensive. Telephone tape recorder auto switches. There's been tens of thousands of these devices sold. Why? Because they work. All you need to do is hook this up to the telephone wire and up to a tape recorder, and every time the phone is picked off the hook, the recorder starts to record. Every time it's hung up, it stops. Very simple. Keeps a record of both sides of the conversation. This particular one has a modular jack, as you see there, that simply plugs into any wall jack on your telephone line. And again, it will start and stop the recorder every time the phone's picked up. However, with the use of a set of alligator adapters simply snapped into place and hooked up to the red wire and to the green wire, this could be hooked up anywhere along the telephone line all the way to the central office, as long as your pair of wires could be identified, and it would record all of your conversation, both sides. Let's look at another device. This is a non-parasitic telephone transmitter. Again, readily available. This one was built from a kit that was available from the back of a communications magazine. When hooked to the telephone line, again, anywhere from the telephone itself all the way to the central office, it will transmit both sides of a conversation to a standard FM type radio. This could have been a crystal controlled device, which means it would transmit specifically on a particular channel to a crystal controlled receiver or a receiver that will tune in that particular frequency. Another device. This one is imported from the Far East, is available all over the world. As you can see, it's quite small, only about the size of a quarter, and yet it will transmit both sides of a conversation to a FM receiver. This one's considered parasitic. In other words, it uses the power from the phone line to transmit to the receiver. Once it's put in place, you never need to go back for batteries. The chances of getting caught placing something like this is fairly small once someone has access to the facilities. And again, if they hit along the line somewhere, As long as they have access to the wire, they're not going to get caught. And they're never going to go back after the transmitter. I'll show you another device. Here's another parasitic transmitter, a little bit smaller yet. We have seen transmitters, parasitic transmitters, down to the size of a grain of rice. They're available, that small. Here's an example. Now this may only transmit 50 feet, but many times that's enough. But I want to keep pointing out that the real threat against your privacy are common devices such as this. Here's another parasitic transmitter. You can see this one's only about the size of a dime, and this kit is available in the back of many communications magazines. It takes a novice maybe an hour or 2 hours to put it together, a maximum. When the red wire and the green wire are attached to the phone line, and this one would be put in series, which means they're attached to the same side of the line, and then the wire in between is cut so that the electricity flows through the transmitter. The gray wire is used as the antenna, and it hooks around the phone line itself. Here's a transmitter, again, not much bigger than a quarter, that could be placed inside a modular jack and plugged right in line with your phone. Any phone on the line, throughout the entire household, would be transmitting both sides of the conversation to a receiver. Quite small. All of the devices that I just showed you generally would be placed inside the home or business, on the telephone line, in the phone, at the demarc point, or along the line. They generally wouldn't be past the central office because it would be very difficult to identify the actual pair of wires that would be used. Let's take a look at how easy it is to hook up a transmitter or a tape recorder. How difficult is it to actually tap a telephone? I'm going to show you with this small transmitter here. First you need to find the demarc point on the house or building. That's where the phone wires come into the building. Remove the cover and attach the transmitter to the green wire and then cut it. Using a standard FM receiver, we're going to see whether or not we can pick up the transmitter. Let's go see. Let's listen in and see what we have.
Executive Protection, may I help you?
Yes, I need to speak to Mark, please.
Could you hold on for one moment, sir?
Hi, this is Mark. Can I help you? Mark, good to talk to you. This is Keith.
Oh, hi, Keith.
I wanted to talk about that contract we were discussing yesterday. I've got some new information for you that I'd like to give you.
Yeah, I also would like to talk to you. We received that secured fax, and there's some questions I have on that.
Okay, why don't we go secure then, and then we can talk about it more.
Okay, go into secure.
All right.
They've gone secure, so we can no longer hear what they're saying. It's totally scrambled from point A to point B. All we get is white noise, just a digital static. In a commercial building, all of the wires, telephone lines, come into a centralized point called a frame room. From there, they're distributed out to all the various extensions, and etc. This is an example of a frame room in a commercial building. Now here's all the phone numbers distributed out to the different extensions. All of the wires from here go out to the central office. Now this is a telephone tape recorder starter switch with a recorder hooked up to a particular line. You'd want to look for something like this, or possibly a line bridged over to another extension, or maybe even an off-premise extension. Beyond this point, it's very difficult to trace the wires back to the phone company and to place a tap along the line unless you either have telephone company assistance, or if you place a tone, which would be a tone generator that would be attached to the line, and then you'd use a line tracing tool to identify the pair somewhere down the road toward the central office. So you need to be sure to check the frame room when you're doing a sweep. Do you have a cellular phone? If you do, I have a little surprise for you. Your privacy is not insured. People can listen to your conversations. I'm going to simply diagram for you how this can be done. Your cellular phone is nothing more than a giant bug, a big transmitter, a radio. And it transmits out to cell sites. These cell sites go through what's called a switch to the telco, the telephone company. That is routed over landline, cellular, or landline, satellite, or microwave to the telephone at the other end, the person you're talking to. Now, why aren't your phone conversations private? They're not private because this transmitter that's transmitting to the cell sites is also transmitting to the general air, just like a bug. And if I have a scanner, I can sit here and listen to both sides of the conversation as it's being transmitted. Now, here's a scanner. This is a scanner that's available in electronic stores across the country. There's many different brands. All it has to have the ability to do is to monitor the 800 megahertz channel. Now, if I were to turn the scanner on,
I don't know if that's good or bad, but they do know it.
I could simply, by running through the stations, listen to cellular telephone calls.
That really are good. Let's put it that way. Who?
Install, my serviceman is up north anyway, so it's just a matter of getting over there.
As you can see, your conversations are available to anybody who has this technology. And we're talking about technology that's under $200. How do you protect yourself? The same way you protect yourself from telephone intercepts, and that is by scrambling from point to point. You must scramble from your cellular phone through the cells to the other end and have a scrambler at the other end to descramble and back and forth. Now, some of you may think that because a scanner will not track a cell to cell to cell, that your conversations are safe when you move into the next cell. That's a common theory that's talked about. Not necessarily true. Each and every cellular phone has what's called an EIN number, an electronic identification number. That is transmitted over the airwaves, and that's how the phone company knows that it's you using your cellular phone and how to bill you. So, if I wanted to follow your calls, just the calls made on your cellular phone, I could combine a small computer with some customized software and a good quality receiver and scan the entire area, listening for just your electronic identification number, and it would latch onto and just record your conversations on that particular channel. Another point is that most conversations, just purely due to the cost of a cellular phone time, most conversations are concluded, we've found, within one cell site anyway. So, yes, indeed, scanners are a very big threat to your privacy. Many of you have a telephone transmitter in your own home and you don't even know it. It's called a portable telephone. A portable telephone transmits to a receiver. Now, let me illustrate here on the board. Transmitter would be the handset here to a base, which is a receiver, and it's attached to the telephone wire. Your transmitter, the handset, transmits to the general atmosphere. Anyone with a standard scanner or communications receiver that would pick up the 49 megahertz band would be able to listen to both sides of your conversation. Now, the handset, the transmitter, may only transmit to this receiver 100 to 200 feet away. However, a good quality receiver could pick it up 1 to 2, maybe even 3 blocks away. You are broadcasting both sides of the conversation to the whole neighborhood. Very dangerous. As I've said before, there is no way to determine whether or not there's a tap on the line between A and B. This could be across town, across the state, or across the country. The only way that you're going to be able to determine if there's a tap on the line is if you can find it yourself. Now, one of the things that we run into a lot that's advertised and sold widely are these little devices called taps and tell or whatever. They're supposedly to tell you by a red light, green light method whether or not your phone's tapped. Let me tell you how they work. All they do is simply measure voltage. Now, if I was to put one of those on a telephone line and you picked it up and says, oh, green light, nothing on the line. Now, I went into the next room and dropped out the carbon mic, unscrewed and dropped out the carbon mic before I picked up the phone, it would not even see that that extension had been lifted. Now, if it can't even see something as simple as that, how is it going to detect a real tap? A real tap generally does not draw enough current for it to trip the light. It's just simply an inexpensive lie. It's a false sense of security. We've shown you that the only method to protect yourself is scrambling. You must scramble all the way from phone A to B and all the way back. What does a telephone scrambler look like? Here's one. This is one of the latest state-of-the-art 9600 baud digital phone scramblers. It generates a new encryption key each and every conversation, which makes it virtually impossible to break without huge computers. If you had the capability of trying 1 million code combinations per second, trying to attack the conversation of this phone, it would take you 584,000 years to go through all possible permutations. Pretty impossible task for most of us. The only way that you are going to find a tap on your phone is if you can find it in a physical search. Now, most honest countermeasures people would tell you that they can't find a tap unless it is on your premises or as far back down the wires they can physically check. There are some tools that can be used. A telephone analyzer can check to see if there's a parallel or series tap on the premises, or if modification's been done to the phone. A time domain reflectometer can look down the wire a ways and see if there's any attachments to the wire, but it will take a physical check of every inch of that wire to see whether or not you have a tap. And then, as we talked about earlier, when it becomes microwave or satellite transmission, etc., it doesn't even require a hard physical tap. It could be anywhere. Also, you could use an RF detection unit like a wideband detector or a spectrum analyzer to search the room or the building for radio waves that could be emanating from your telephone line, from a transmitter on your telephone line. But short of this, there is no other way to say yes, no, positively, that there is a tap on the line. Also, we've heard stories, I'm sure you've heard them too, about the phone number that you can call into and determine whether or not your phone is tapped. Again, just another old wives' tale. It doesn't work. Protect yourself. If you want to protect yourself, you must scramble from one phone to another. That's why the government does it. Everything I've told you about telephone taps and intercepts also applies to fax. Facsimile transmissions are simply transmitted over telephone lines or cellular, and they can be tapped in the same fashion. In fact, there are several commercial facsimile taps available in the world market. What's the solution? How do you protect yourself? The same as always, you scramble. In fact, here's a fax encryption unit that runs at the same high level of encryption that we described in the phone. I just want to conclude and say that there is only one way to find a tap, and that's going to be a physical search, aided with equipment, but a strong physical search. And two, your only protection is the scramble, period. We've been talking about telephone taps. Now we're going to talk about room bugs. My definition of a bug is a device that's placed into an area and intended to either transmit or gather intelligence, conversation, and bring it back to another location where it can be either listened to or recorded surreptitiously by another party, unauthorized recording or listening to a conversation. When you're dealing with a transmitter, which we'll talk about first as transmitters, you need to think of it just like a miniature radio station. Here's a small radio beacon going to a receiver. Now that could be any type of receiver depending on the frequency that it transmits on. Here's a standard FM receiver, such as the one in your car or any other type of receiver. It could also be to a small crystal-controlled pocket-sized receiver, like the really high-quality units. This would be crystal-controlled, locked on a particular frequency. There's all types of different receivers, as long as you understand that it is a transmitter, a little radio station, going to a receiver. I'm going to show you a few of those different transmitters now. Here's a transmitter that is produced from a kit that's offered in the back of many communications magazines. It transmits on the FM band, is adjustable to different frequencies. The black wire would be the antenna, and it's powered by a 9-volt battery. Now, with just a simple adjustment, this could be placed in a room, and with only a small opening here to the microphone, it would transmit for a couple of blocks all the different sounds picked up by that microphone. Other transmitters that are out on the open market. Here's a pair of transmitters that are imported from Japan and oftentimes sold as listening devices for people that have hearing problems, or as a security device, monitor for a spare room or a garage. You can see by the size of my hand there, this transmitter is quite small and runs on a hearing aid battery. And it'll run for about a day on a battery like that. Now here's a much more sophisticated unit. Although a little bit larger, it's much more powerful than the previous transmitters I've shown you. This runs on a crystal-controlled frequency. We've seen these type of units run for up to 5 days and will transmit 1,000 feet without much of a problem. Now, some of the important features about transmitting is the length of the antenna, the fact that it's tuned to the proper frequency, the power of the battery source equates to how long it can operate, and but the operating range, how far it actually transmits, changes all the time with ambient conditions. Now, if there's a lot of RF signals in the air, that will tend to dampen the distance that it will travel. If they're in an enclosed building with a lot of metal, that will shorten range. But power, you don't need a lot of power in a transmitter. The real secret to range is a high-quality receiver with the proper antennas, etc. Very sensitive receiver, you'll get twice the range with the same powerfulness of a transmitter. I'm going to show you a few surreptitious type transmitters that could be placed in a number of different devices, just to give you an idea what you need to look for to protect yourself in a boardroom or a business situation or even your home. Here's a wall plug that has a transmitter built in, and it can be exchanged out for a standard wall plug. It will still work as a regular wall plug, yet it will pick up and transmit all the conversation in a standard room, standard size room, say a 20 by 20 room, and yet we'll transmit that to a standard receiver. Never needs batteries, and once it's placed, it's in there forever until it's discovered or the operation's over. Here's a smoke detector. Now this was a homemade transmitter that was found in the smoke detector, and cleverly enough, the battery uses a standard 9-volt battery here. The battery was changed by a janitor or a secretary. You'd never notice that in your home. It looks very much in place. Here's a pair of pens. Okay, now I'm putting, see that a little closer. Here's a pair of pens. Now these pens actually write, okay, but they will transmit using hearing aid type batteries. They will transmit all the conversation in a room to a receiver up to 100 yards away or further, depending on the actual location of the transmitter and so on. Now, Another device, a calculator. This calculator runs off 2 AA batteries and a standard fully functional calculator. You can do multiplication on it, division, etc. And yet it has a transmitter built into it that will transmit to this same small receiver that's available that we showed you a little bit earlier here. Now, why would you want a transmitter like this? Let me give you an illustration how it could be used against you. Say that we're involved with a multi-million-dollar contract and we're going through the actual negotiations, and you have decided that you want us as your provider of the service, and I've given you a price of $3.5 million. Now I say, gentlemen, that's our best we can do. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think it over. I'll obviously need a few minutes to think it over, and I will just leave the room and come back in a few minutes later. As I leave the room, I'm listening in my little monitor through the earphone to everything you're saying. And you're saying, geez, we'd really like to go with this guy, but let's see if we can't beat him down another $500,000. Meanwhile, this transmitter is transmitting all that information to me. I come back into the room, and without you ever knowing that I have this information, I say, gentlemen, obviously you don't know a good price when you see it. I start to close up my briefcase. I say, I'll have to see you later. And you're going to go for it. You're going to go for the $3 million. This calculator saved that businessman $500,000. Now, that would be legal to use it for that purpose, and we're not suggesting that. I'm just trying to give you an illustration how it could cost you $500,000 or more. In the case of business secrets, maybe research and development, it could cost 100 times that. Now we're going to talk about carrier current. Carrier current is another type of device that is available at almost any electronic store. This is a carrier current transmitter. Okay, you can see that it's by a standard manufacturer. It's available for about $30. And what carrier current means is that it picks up all the audio in the room and will transmit it over a standard 110 circuitry through the wall plug to a matching receiver somewhere else. They're commonly used as an intercom. However, when they're taken apart, such as this, and broken open, these units could be rewired into a lamp, a radio, a typewriter, any type of device that would be plugged in all the time and could be used to pick up all the room audio, sent over the wiring that's already in place, and it's not transmitting now to like a transmitter. It is sending that over the wires. If I was in another office on the same side of the loop, on the same side of the transformer, I could plug in a corresponding unit and be able to listen to everything that's happening in that room. And again, you'd never have to replace batteries. It will pick up all the sounds 24 hours a day and send them over that circuitry. Carrier current is a very dangerous item out there because it's so available, it's so flexible. And again, there's no danger of someone accidentally picking it up on a radio station or on a receiver. Let's talk about wired microphones. Wired microphones are one of the most difficult type of device to find if they're properly placed because they're totally passive. The microphone that I show you here would be placed somewhere in the room, and as you can see, it has a very, very small opening. It would only need a pinhole to bring in the audio into the microphone, and then that would be amplified through a powered amplifier at a remote location. It's remotely powered by, it runs off a 9-volt battery and would last for weeks, if not months, and plugged into a tape recorder at the other end, or someone could be sitting there listening. Now, that would be very difficult to find unless you have the ability to really tear apart the room. Another type of wired microphone would be this type of babysitter that's available from most of the same type of electronic stores. And what it has is it's been adapted to have a remote microphone plugged into it. right here. And it plugs in. It will pick up all the sounds in the room and then transmit those over FM to a receiver. So you're dealing with a combination of a wired microphone and a transmitter. Now that would be picked up with a receiver that would be matching the same corresponding frequency as this. This, again, runs off 110 volt, never needs batteries. These are sold as babysitters. Now, 99% of them are used in a lawful fashion, but they could be used against you in an unlawful fashion. Well, I want to show you another microphone that is really, really difficult to find. If you'll take a look at this microphone, you can see that it's only about the size of a couple of grains of rice, and there is the actual tip of the microphone. That's all that would have to be exposed to the room audio. Now this is out of a hearing aid, and these are available commercially, and they would have a very fine set of wires that would be run back to a listening post somewhere else. Once that's placed, there have been situations on government against government international cases where wired microphones have been in place for many, many years and were never found until they were tearing down the building. Even after doing ongoing countermeasures searches, sweeping the rooms themselves for the microphones, and unless they knew exactly where they were located, it's very difficult to find them because they could be built into something at the time of the building. Let's talk about laser. Laser is another passive type of listening device to listen into a room. Now the way laser works, and you hear a lot about laser, it's not really as effective as it sounds, but a laser beam is pointed at a window at a slight angle. The beam is deflected off the window back to a receiver at a slightly different angle. Now, the way the window will vibrate, as we're talking right now, a window in this room would be vibrating like a diaphragm on a stethoscope, say. It's moving slightly. The laser measures those slight pulses and demodulates, which means turns it into an audible signal, demodulates those pulses into room audio. Now, there's a lot of limitations to lasers in the real world. If buildings tend to move, there tends to be a lot of outside noise that can affect the windows and rattle buildings and so on. But they are out there and they are a threat. Now let's talk about telephone modifications. Many single-line telephones can be modified to where they will pick up room sounds and transmit them down the phone line. That's called a hook-switch bypass. However, many of the electronic phones are already set up. They're called hot-on-hook. Basically, what that means is that the microphone has power to it even when it's in the hung-up or on-hook position. So it's actually picking up all the sounds in the room, because it is a microphone, picking up all the sounds in the room and transmitting that over the phone lines. Anyone that had a device attached to the phone lines would pick up all the sounds in that room. And that's a very dangerous situation, and no one would have to make a physical entry into your office because it's already there. Now, many phones of the new types of electronic phones have speakers or intercom systems. These speakers, or for that matter, any speaker in a room, can be modified into a microphone. Very simply, it is already essentially a microphone. And anywhere that those wires are attached to can be an amplifier, and a listening post could be developed anywhere those wires go to. Contact microphones. Contact microphones are used on the exterior of a room generally to get audio intelligence from the inside of the room. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. First off, this would be considered a spike microphone. And basically, if you can see the small spike, that would be, a hole would be drilled in one side of the wall, and the spike run through and attached to where it ran up against the other wall. The other wall would act as a diaphragm, and when sound waves strike the wall, such as the conversation I'm having now would be bouncing off the walls, it will be picked up and amplified through the amplifier and into a set of headphones or into a recorder. That could be, that's one way of attacking through a wall and hearing what's going on inside a room. Here's another type of contact microphone. It essentially is a electronic resonating chamber that would be placed tight up against the wall, and it amplifies through the headphones or to a recorder all the sounds that are on the other side of the wall. Same principle, basically. Long-distance microphones. Many people are concerned about the long-distance microphones or parabolic microphones that they see advertised. These units are capable of picking up sound from a distance and amplifying it, but they're really not as effective as many people would have you believe. There are many factors that determine how far something like that can really be utilized. Ambient noise levels, such as you would not be able to record me if there were cars running back and forth behind me, making a lot of noise. Generally, they work only in quiet environments. Now, as far as detecting a passive device, it's passive. There's no signal produced by that device. Therefore, there's no signal that can be picked up from it. The only thing you could possibly do was feed back the microphone. Let's talk about body wires. Body wires are used in face-to-face conversations where one party would be wearing a transmitter and that would be transmitting to another location where the receiver would be. Oftentimes used in officer protection. The idea is to, if a deal goes down wrong, the backup is in a position to understand, to hear what's actually happening, and to respond to it. Here's an actual body wire. You can see that they're not real large. This would be worn on the body, the transmitter would. And here's the microphone. Okay, it's relatively small. It could be hidden on the person. Now, body wires can be disguised as any number of things. For example, in this pack of cigarettes here, I have a body wire. You can see that it's pretty small, and it could be in a pack of cigarettes. It could be in a baseball hat. A number of other objects could have that type of transmitter in it. There are vibrating type body wire detectors on the market, and they work with a varying degree of success depending upon range. The only reason we're letting you know about these is because they can also be used in another type of surreptitious fashion to possibly get you to say something you really don't want to say and invade your privacy that way. That's why we're trying to make you aware of it. Next, let's talk about tape recorders. Now, tape recorder could be hidden on someone's person or in a room, and they're very difficult to detect because they're a passive device. They generally do not emit much in the way of any kind of frequency, except some have what's called an oscillating bias, and that's how a tape recorder detector would work. It picks up the oscillating bias from the recorder itself. Generally, though, they're very limited in range. They can pick this up from, say, a few inches to 2-3 feet away, sometimes a little bit further. The way that they're used is the wand or antenna would be down on the sleeve, and someone would, hey, pat you on the back, say, how's it going, move a briefcase, check for a briefcase recorder in that fashion, and so on. But recorders are one of the most difficult devices to detect, except in a physical search. Countermeasures. How can you defeat these types of attacks against your privacy? First off, the most important aspect in looking for any of the devices we've shown you is a physical search. When you are looking at a room, your office, your home, whatever, you must think of it as a six-sided cube. A device could be placed anywhere on the inside or the outside of that cube. And so we have to look at all the walls, the floor, the ceiling, all the outside of the walls, the floor, the ceiling, the windows, etc., to truly eliminate the possibility of any device being present on the inside or outside. Now I'm going to show you how to detect a transmitter. There's a number of different ways you can detect transmitters. Again, the physical search is the most important, but there are some devices that will aid you in your search. You could utilize something like a spectrum analyzer, and that'd be wonderful, except they cost $10,000 to $15,000. There's some less expensive devices on the market that run in the $500 to $2,000 range that will do the job. Here's a wideband RF detection unit that we will use a transmitter. Here's a transmitter we showed you earlier. Now, if you watch the LED, the red LED on the front of the unit, when I turn on the transmitter, it peaks out all the way high. Now watch that. Now this is just a standard transmitter. This one is not pumped up. It is about a 100 milliwatt transmitter, 50 to 100 milliwatt. Okay? You can see each time how that, every time I touch the battery to it and turn it on, how it pegs it out. Now the way you'd use a device like this is to sweep a room in a horizontal and vertical fashion with the antenna, looking for the signal. When you find a signal, now you're playing a game of basically hot and cold, and you're zeroing in onto where that signal is. Once you find the location where you think the signal's coming from, how do you know it's a real transmitter? Well, you don't unless you can demodulate it or find the actual transmitter. If, for example, there's a wall here, and I have a signal, a strong RF signal, radio frequency, RF, coming from that wall, rather than tear down the wall looking for a transmitter, what I'm going to do is I'll play some music on a cassette player or use some other form of room audio sound to generate in the room, and I will listen through the headphones on the receiver. If I hear that sound back through my headphones, then I know that there's an actual microphone and transmitter right there in the room. Okay? So, you must be able to demodulate the signal. Otherwise, you're going to be knocking down walls. And I've literally heard of people doing that with some of these real inexpensive wideband detectors. This device is just a better version. It will give you a little more sensitive, a little wider range, as far as this will run up to about 2 gigahertz looking for a signal. But it's looking at the whole spectrum at one time. Not a narrow band like a spectrum analyzer will do for you. It'll show you exactly what frequency that's on. Additional countermeasures. If you're looking for a carrier current transmitter, there are carrier current transmitter detectors that plug right into the outlet, the 110 outlet, and again will allow you to demodulate, hear the audio that would be in the room. It's very important for you to use a known sound source. The reason for a known sound source is so that you don't pick up a radio station, a local radio station, and think that that's the transmitter. Many times when you're checking for a carrier current or even RF, you will hear local radio stations that are broadcast through the air, or maybe CBs, portable radios, even possibly cellular. Some of the other types of detection units will interface both the RF capabilities and the carrier current capabilities with different modular jacks or plugs. If you're looking for a microphone, such as the small little electronic microphone we showed you from a hearing aid, or a remote-powered microphone that would run back to a recorder, the only way you're going to find that is a physical search. You must look at all the walls, furniture, etc., anywhere that could be placed. When you find a pair of wires, and you don't know where they come from and you don't know where they go, you must have a tool such as an amplifier you could get from Radio Shack and a pair of alligator clips, or a device like this has the capability to demodulate the audio on the pair. The first thing you, of course, want to make sure is they're not high voltage on that pair. Then you will latch onto them, check for audio. If you hear your sound source, then you know you have a microphone at one end of the wire or the other, and you can go find it. If you're looking for hook switch bypasses and things like that that could be used as the phone as a bug in the room, there are devices available that will allow you to check that. One of the things you can do is use another phone, put the sound source near the phone, and listen on an extension phone to see whether or not you have any bleed through from that microphone with the phone on hook. that would tell you that possibly you might have a hook switch bypass. We've also seen situations where phones were not modified on purpose, but were transmitting all such as the portable phones, were transmitting all the sounds. Even when they were on hook, they were transmitting the sounds from the other extension phones. One of the important things to remember when you're doing a search is that, generally speaking, you have greater access than the person doing the wiretapping or the bugging, except in the cases of where it could be on a phone line, down line toward the central office, etc. But generally speaking, on your premises, you have greater access than someone else. Therefore, when you're looking for something, you've got to keep the mindset that as I'm looking around this six-sided cube, where might someone else have access and time to place this type of device? So when you're doing a sweep, take a look at that. Now, I want to talk about many of the folks out there that are involved in doing sweeps, technical surveillance countermeasures, TSCM, as it's called in the industry. There's a lot of very competent and very good people out there, members of some of the different trade associations such as ASIS, ComSec, etc. However, there's a lot of charlatans out there that will simply pretend to be doing a sweep, pretend to actually doing some work, and they'll simply walk through with a very limited amount of knowledge and do what we call as a rain dance with a bunch of fancy flashing lights or put together Mickey Mouse type gear. I wanted to warn you about those folks. Many times you can do a much better job yourself with a small amount of equipment than they can do. Don't get ripped off. I would like to conclude by saying that I hope I have made you more aware of the threat posed to you by telephone taps and room bugs and what you can do to defeat them. Thank you.